get in there, take the tools, break your knuckles, throw the tools across the room, because you can't figure out, and electrical, I hate electrical problems, and that's coming from a studio owner, because electricity is like trying to find a leak in your roof. It's like, it's got a million paths that can be wrong, but the good thing about older cars is the wiring harnesses on those things aren't as near as complicated as they are modern cars. Modern cars, I pick up the hood, look at it, I just put the hood back down and walk away. I don't know anything about them, I don't want to know about them.
You helped me get through, and I'm emotional, I'm sorry, but a tough time with the church. And my father committed suicide, went through a tough time, and they were telling me that, there was a question at one time at Sunday school, and they said, your father went to hell, and I was like, well, how do you know what between he time he shot himself and he died, what happened? That was mine. And then you said in the interview how you were mad at the church, not God, or you thought you were mad at God, but you were mad at the church.
Correct.
Could you elaborate on how you felt?
But first of all, I'm really sorry to hear about your loss. Mahatma Gandhi once said, he goes, "You're Christ. I like him very much. But your Christians I do not like. They are so unlike your Christ." Now we're men, we're women. We're flawed, we know that. But boy, some of the times, some of the stuff I used to see, I still see. I'll be frank with you, I just left the church over this, a very similar type of thing. And the brazen, I gotta choose my words here carefully. It's unconscionable. We're taught to love. And I'm sorry, you act like an ass, and you're doing the exact opposite. First of all, someone show me a verse in the Bible that has anything to do with suicide and somebody going to hell. Show me one.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist. Anybody who's in enough pain, believer or non-believer, you're in enough pain, all of us are capable of doing stuff we may never think possible. And I too am one of those people that have evolved over this subject over the years because, growing up under that institutionalized thinking, you're taught, well, you do that, you're destroying God's creature and da-da-da-da-da. That's a one-way ticket to hell. That's not true. I do not believe that for 1 minute. Would we have to account for it? Probably, but there's a big difference between accounting and being rejected by the King of the universe, so, and again, I'm really, really sorry for your loss, but what you're telling me right now angers me, and especially at a moment where I'm already a little raw to some of the stuff that's happened. I hate hearing these stories.
It just kept my faith. You brought my faith back that I was mad, not at God, but
right.
It really changed my look, the way my look, and well, that makes. I understand that,
The callousness of some of the guys, especially. All right, you guys around here, I assume, are mostly Southern Baptist, to some degree. I mean, I grew up in that, and there's some wonderful stuff about it. But boy, there's some stuff that will just gall you to no end. I had an uncle that was a preacher. My dad was Sunday school superintendent. My grandfather was a deacon. So that's to say that when the doors was open, I was there. So the guy I played with in school, the drummer in the band that I was in high school, his dad was our preacher. And I used to hang out over at their house a lot of times, and I saw preachers do things that you never would believe, because they're human just like anybody else. I'm not saying he was a bad man, he was a good man. But they got their moments, boy, like anybody else, and he can fly high, you know, so. And I watched him try to keep, and first of all, that church split into two factions, and half the church went with him and half went somewhere else. And that church was forever fragmented and never really healed. And it was all because of the crap that was going on internally inside that church, and it disgusts me. And like I said, I've just experienced something similar to that, and I just, sorry, I didn't mean to get off on, you know, your
No, thank
subject,
you.
but just to let you know, this goes on every day. That's right. Nothing? You're up.
What was the first song you decided to play and why?
Well, the first memory I have of anything in life is one of your patron sons here in St. Louis, Chuck Berry, Sweet Little 16.
Yes.
I was 2 years old, and I've described the situation to my parents a number of times, and they said exactly that I knew where I was, because I was sitting in a high chair at a breakfast table, and they were eating powdered donuts. And that song came on, and it was like, I didn't know what it was, but somehow it was talking to me, you know. What was the first song I played? That I can't tell you. My mother also told me that she'd take me to the grocery store, you know, put the kid in the cart in that seat where they can't escape, you know, and she'd forget something and go back to one of the other aisles. She said she'd come back, I'd be down on the floor and have a crowd around me, and I'd be doing hound dog. 2 years old. And she said she should have known then what I was going to do for a living. So, whichever song, pick one or the other. I can't really remember that far back as to which one it was.
So back in the 80s when you're doing LA clubs, what other bands were playing at the same time that you have like the most vivid memories of today? Positive or negative? Or both?
Well,
You hear crazy stories.
the biggest thing I would say about that is you have to understand what happened in the early 80s in LA, you really have to look back at the late 70s. Because LA was in a death grip of disco and new wave and stuff like that. All those bands that came out of the early 80s were all there at that time. They just couldn't get work. And so by a series of events, some of the clubs started opening up to our kind of music. And we were able to show them that there was an audience there that we could sell tickets to. So I wouldn't say it was any one band, I would say it was a movement of several bands that created that. Because when you put it all together, you could go to, especially the Troubadour, you go to the Troubadour almost any night of the week and see one of those bands that would later go on to get signed. And that tension, that electricity was so thick in the air, you could cut it with a knife. And I remember one of the last times we played there, we pulled up to, there was the main entrance right on Santa Monica Boulevard, and then you went around the back of the building where the band's loaded in to where the stage was. And that's mostly where we would go in from the back. But to get there, you had to go down Santa Monica where the box office was. And it was a Saturday night, and we pulled up, and there was probably 8 people wide on the sidewalk trying to get in. Now this place legally only held 300. You could put 700 in there, but you had to put, hog fat on it and slide. So 8 people wide going down the sidewalk that was probably 35, 40 yards long. And I'm thinking there's no way all these people are gonna get in. We got to the corner to go around the building. That same 8 people wide was going 100 yards down the way.
Wow.
There was no way they were getting in. And I remember thinking when I was a kid, looking at those pictures of the Beatles playing the Cavern Club on those lunchtime sessions, the lines would be out the door. And I remember thinking to myself when I was a kid, that must be what it's like before success really happens to you. This phenomenon starts. And we pulled up to the Troupe that night, and I saw that line, and those pictures of the Beatles flashed in my head. And I thought, son of a bitch, this is it. This
Yeah.
is the way it happened. So
Magical.
that night, there was more people outside than there was inside. And there's a set of double doors that, where you first go in, but in Santa Monica Boulevard, there's this concrete median right in the middle of the street. There's 2 lanes on one side, 2 on the other. There was more people outside standing on that concrete median than there was actually in the venue. I had them open the doors, and I turned sideways, and I sang to the people out on the concrete median out in the middle of the road. You know, that,
Wow.
those kind of memories you don't forget. Yes, sir.
Hypothetical question. Crimson Idol, if this, it's just if Jonathan hadn't taken his own life, how would he have turned out? What would have happened to him if he hadn't have done that?
Well, I didn't get that far in the story. You'd have to let me think about that for a little bit, but I do know this, that I was pondering, should I or shouldn't I do this? And so Rod Smallwood, my manager, I called him up and I told him the idea that, and then you say, okay, looking back on it, how could I have doubted that ending? Well, I did, because you gotta remember, the image of the band in the beginning was so associated with the sensational. I didn't want this story to be contaminated by our past. And so I thought, okay, could this be construed as sensationalism? And so I called Rod and I said, I got this idea for the way to end it. And he says, what is it? I says, he takes the 6 strings from the guitar, he makes a noose and hangs it. Rod screamed on the other end of the phone. And I thought, well, this is either really good or really bad, you know? And I said, what's that mean? He goes, it's freaking brilliant. And I said, okay, there's my answer. I hung up the phone. So that's what we went. So really, to answer your question, boy, I've never, and this is what I was talking about earlier about you guys asking questions that journalists don't ask. I've done over 14,000 interviews in my career. No one has ever asked that question. You know, so that's a good one. And I would have to just chew on that for a while. I really couldn't tell you.
It's been, I think about it a lot. It's just, it's so powerful.
All right, what would you think? Okay, and before you answer, let me tell you, all art is subjective.
Yeah.
There is no wrong. Everybody's right in their interpretation. So what's
Right.
your interpretation?
His parents were heretics, right? They were horribly cruel to him.
Well, let's back up. His parents was exactly what he's been going through.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so, okay, go ahead.
Exactly. But Jonathan had so much promise. He was a pure soul. And to take a child like that and abuse him like that, I mean, that was just, it was painful. There's people watching.
All right, but where does he go? If he's had that,
Yeah,
you know, the Catholics say give us a child till he's 7, we'll set his ways for life.
Yeah.
In other words, that means we get a hold of him, we never let him go. You know, so that indoctrination can work both ways. You know, and like I said, that's the reason why I look at some of the church sometimes and I grit my teeth over it.
yeah.
Because of this very thing. You know, I mean, you can hurt people, you can scar them for life. You look at a way that a lot of the Catholics have been raised, the attitude, the anger that they have, you know, I understand, you know, I didn't go through that. I saw enough from a distance to go, wow, that looks pretty bad. I'm glad I'm not part of that, you know, but they can screw some kids up big time. But, you know, what would have happened to him? Boy, you know, I mean, and see, in my mind's eye, I've closed that story off because it's a simple story. It's just a kid looking for love. I mean, you get past the veneer or the simplicity, and it is a complicated story. But it only depends on who wants to look at it as such. You know, if you want to get into the in-depth nuances of it, then yes, it can be extremely complicated. But on the surface, for those that don't want to see it as complicated, it's real simple, you know. But, you know, and I've told people a story that and you'll see in one of the films tonight when we do, because we're gonna do a couple of songs from it. The guy that plays Michael, his brother, is a guy, and you'll, like I said, you'll see him on film tonight. Michael is the guy, in reality, his name is Jake Wood. And Jake is actually a very big star in the UK right now. He's been on a soap opera over there for 20 years. But you guys know Jake here as well. You just don't know that you know him. He's been the voice of the Geico Gecko for almost 20 years.
Wow.
So did you figure out something yet?
You want to ask one for me, or?
Go ahead.
So, what's your favorite album? Not non-Wasp. Just any.
You got kids?
We have a grandson.
Just one?
Yes.
Is he your favorite?
Well,
Yeah.
kind of hard to.
Kind of hard to narrow it down.
Yeah.
Right,
I
right.
understand.
You
Anything
named
else?
some great ones, though.
No?
Oh,
Just
yeah.
want to say we're stoked to have you, man.
Well, hey, listen,
Yes.
Yes.
So much.
I appreciate it. You know, I mean, this has been a lot of fun for me. Like I said, I'll get questions like this from time to time. Now, you realize I'm gonna be thinking about this all the time.
So you got in his head. That's good.
You've gotten mine for years. I mean,
Well-
decades you've been in my head, so rent-free.
Hey,
you
too,
know?
Brute. I gotta go to work.
Thank you, Blackie. Thank you.
Yes.